Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Blink Podcast, Season 2, Episode 8, and a very special guest today. Darren has given me the keys to the Ferrari. I'm flying solo, but joining me is 4 times Australian memory champion, Tansel, and we're going to talk about how to get over that procrastination hump. Hello, Tansel, and welcome to the Blink Podcast. Great to have you on. Of course, we've got a friendship and a relationship that goes back many, many years. It's great to finally have you on the show. Welcome, buddy.
Mate, thanks for having me on. It's awesome to be here.
Now, normally we have Darren sitting on the other side of you, but he's been caught up today, so unfortunately he hasn't been able to make it. He sends his apologies. But I thought, you know what? I'm not going to waste this opportunity to talk to you, to tap into your knowledge and your brain, and to give some real insight into how the brain works from someone who's made a living out of working with brains. How did that begin for you? How did you start this memory challenge?
Well, it's funny you mention that because I never really believed that people could improve their brains, let alone memory. So I was a skeptic. And then a friend of mine, he came up to me and said, Tansel, I can remember 40 random objects back to front, any order. And I thought, surely, come on, you can't do that. So I had to test him. And I gave him a whole bunch of words and he memorized them perfectly. And I didn't see him write down anything or, cheat. And I'm thinking, hang on, what's going on here? And I said, how did you do that? How did you remember everything perfectly? And he said, it's just memory techniques. I'm like, well, where'd you get it from? What's this memory techniques business? And he goes, I read a book. I'm like, what's the book's name? And he couldn't remember, the idiot. So I realized that, there were strategies out there and there was a really powerful tool back in the day. It still exists today, believe it or not. So your viewers can, maybe write this down. It's called google.com, right? So if you go to google.com, type in memory techniques, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff. So I started reading and researching and, I didn't realize there was techniques out there that actually worked. And from there, I got excited and, did a bit of memory training with my friend and we entered memory competitions and thinking would come last. And all of a sudden we're, top of Australia, breaking memory records and, moving on from there. So, it's amazing how the journey started.
So you started breaking records with Coach Google in your corner.
Coach Google, man, that's all it took. But, the records weren't spectacular back in the day either. So, this was going back over 21 years now. Now the records are just, it's spectacular. So I think I got in at a good time as well.
Now, tell us about what is a memory competition? How do they work? You are 4 times Australian memory champion, and that's actually how we met over, it must be 15, 20 years ago when we first got together. And folks, the reason that Tansel and I met was a bit of a branded content advertising campaign where Yellow Pages, which is the phone book here in Australia for businesses, came to Channel 7 where I was working and said, we've got this guy who can recite the Yellow Pages phone book. And if you've actually got my book, like, comment, share, buy, there's actually a chapter about Tansel in it. And because it's really important, what he teaches actually works across more things than just improving your memory. It works in recall for advertising. It works with customers recalling you as a person that they trust, someone that they remember so they can refer you. There's so many different applications to this. So don't get sucked into the early part of this podcast thinking that we're just talking about memory. We're actually going to be talking about how you apply it to your business because it is so, so important. It's probably the cornerstone of where it all begins. But let's go back to when you and I met. You were doing memory competitions and then got tied up with Yellow Pages in that corporate campaign and bang, we crashed together.
Yeah, it's I'm glad you mentioned the practical application stuff because people, even me, thought that memory, competitions, all this stuff was just, very nerdy, type, very niche, nerdy, but when I went to the actual competitions, which, the national competition was a 1-day event, where you had to memorize like names and faces, random digits and numbers, random dates, all this, innocuous stuff, right? And whoever memorizes the most wins. That's how they have these competitions. Um, I went into those events thinking there's going to be all these nerdy type of people, but really there was everyday people like you and me going in there just interested about the brain, or interested about developing themselves, or remembering names better, or connecting with people at a higher level. And I thought, wow, here I am thinking all these, nerdy preconceived notions of what a competition is. And then I come out of it thinking, wow, I didn't realize there's so many cool people out there wanting to help their teams, or, be better leaders, or, just to kill things like procrastination using their brain. And I thought, wow, there's so many elements to this. And that made me realize that, wow, there's greater power in not just remembering, but using these skills. So that's what drove me further in and deeper into this topic.
So let's get into it. What do you see as the biggest hurdle that people are struggling with today that you can help them solve?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on information wise. There's people talk about information overload. There's also, technology, things like that. And we tend to put blame on these things. But what people don't realize is that the onus is on each individual as well to learn techniques, strategies, skills, to not just be able to cope with all of this, but to thrive in that information type age, or technology and so forth. And unfortunately, we're not taught a lot of these skills at school. We're taught, rote learning, repetition, all that sort of stuff. But we're not taught how to think. We're not taught how to strategize and use certain skills that are going to help us. So that's where I found I found these through memory training myself. Because when I entered competitions, there was a lot of self talk. There's a lot of overwhelm, like what information do I use? So the big problem that I find with a lot of people, especially the ones that I work with, is how do I create greater clarity and focus in what I want to be able to do with all this information around me. So that's just, yeah, one area that's a massive problem that I usually try and get the people to connect the dots with.
And that's sort of your sweet spot now, isn't it? It's actually, um, not picking on the education system too much because my wife is a teacher, um, but actually giving them the strategies to deal with what's coming next, to deal with what's evolving. And we're seeing it right now with the explosion of AI, which for most people, 12 months to 18 months ago wouldn't have even been on their radar. And then at the moment, there just seems to be this feeding frenzy of using AI to do everything. And that concerns me, to be honest, because I think AI has some systematic applications, can help you systemize things a lot easier. But if you start using it to do your thinking, if you start using it to create your content, and I'm not saying this just to protect my business because I teach people how to make content, then you're taking the human element out of that creative process. And I think that's what we need to protect as humans. We need to, each and every one of us is individually different when it comes to creativity. And that's the superpower that we're going to have in the future. But we've got this explosion of AI, and you see it in your Facebook feeds, or I definitely do now. You got all these people who 12 months ago were social media experts teaching us how to do social media, and now AI experts and how to make $1 million with AI and how to apply AI to your business to get endless leads. And I look at these people and just say, man, you're really just surfers on waves. You're jumping on waves. But in saying that, the AI wave is big. I think for the majority of people, it's overwhelming. And I think this, Tansel, is where you come in, and it's so important what you teach is the strategies to overcome that overwhelm, to be able to deal with what the fire hose of information that's heading to us. And you said right at the start of this interview, if you want to learn memory techniques, just go to Google. My instant response was, okay, but how are we going to know which is the good stuff and which is the bad stuff? How do we manage it? How do we get our brains to just not get lost down the rabbit hole and then stop?
Yeah, that's what generally happens when you have a forum like that, whether it's AI or Google, and you do your searches. You get overwhelmed with all this information, and the big question then is, well, what's relevant, what's important? AI doesn't always give you correct answers as well. I typed in my name, who is Tansel, and it wrote me some books I've never heard of that I've written, which is hilarious. So
And you can
there's going
see
to be
how that
things
would
out
be
there. Yeah.
attractive, right? And you can see how that'd be attractive. It's almost like a shortcut. Yeah, you've written a number of books. I've written a book. It took me 2 or 3 years to write my book, and I know it didn't take you as long. In fact, probably the last 3 months of writing my book was the best 3 months because you gave me a mind map technique, which allowed me to actually put it all into position. Because, and it's funny to explain. You gave me this mind map technique. I know we didn't quite get to your answer, but I think this is a key point. Is I was writing the book sort of in the way that schools had taught you to write a book, chapter, verse, chapter, verse, chapter, verse, right? And I was like, okay, I'm just stepping through, stepping through, stepping through. And I think we sat down at a cafe somewhere, maybe Federation Square, and you said, no, 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 that's not how the brain works. The brain's this organism that branches out like trees. Put your book out in trees and then see how it all ties together to the main trunk of the lesson. It was almost the mind map for my book almost looked like a tree of knowledge when I go back and look at it. And so the moment you gave me that technique and I applied it, the book literally just fell out of my knowledge.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. How do you? I don't even know what the question is now. I've sort of got lost, but because I'm so overwhelmed thinking about it, how do you teach people to be able to manage all this stuff? Like, how should they be writing down their tasks or approaching their days or avoiding the overwhelm?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point because your point leads to, we haven't learnt these new strategies and we're doing things that, we sort of just came to just do, like write down in linear form. And then there's things like writer's block and whatever. And because you got all this information, what happens if the brain's got too much information? Nothing gets done as well. So hence that also contributes to things like writer's block if you're writing a book. Whereas what I believe in is more like an agile approach, like in project management, where you don't have to do everything all in one go, right? So for example, when we read a book, right, we're not taught how to read a book. We're just taught that just go on, these words mean something, go and read it. And when you're reading it, try and not just read it, but try and understand it, try and memorize any important bits, try to study it, try to reflect on it, try to do all these things all at once. And unfortunately, what happens is that the brain can't handle all that. So you end up forgetting, going back and rereading. And that's if you can read. And a lot of people, and I've read the research on this, don't go past chapter 2 of a book when they start reading. So I'm sure you'll have a lot of people watching or listening that have these issues. So the best thing to do is organize any large amount of information that you've got, right? So your book, right, you organized it initially into that tree system, and then you could see, okay, here's the introduction, here's this particular technique, here's this model, here's Tansel story, whatever you've got. Now you know where that's being placed. You don't have to know exactly how to write it, but it gives you a good bird's eye view of everything. That's stage one. Stage two is now, okay, I'm just going to slowly start writing in between. If you're stuck in one area, you can actually start somewhere else. And that's how they make movies, right? They don't make a movie from start to finish. Sometimes they start at the end, right, of
Mm.
filming. So it's a similar type of process. And if you understand how to structure this approach, then it'll be so much easier to manage that information as well. Another example that I usually give my clients is if I was on a whiteboard and just did a whole bunch of dots on the whiteboard with the pens, right? How many dots would there be? You'd only be guessing, right? Whereas if I did 10 dots across and 10 dots down and filled them all perfectly, within seconds you'll say, oh, there's 100. Why? Because the information is organized in the second way, whereas the first way, it's not organized, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah.
really interesting. That's really interesting. And going back going back to the organizing the information, the moment you said that and actually knowing where you go, I think that's really important and really important in business that you guys, you have to have an idea of where you want to go, and then your brain will show you the pathway there. Now, it might not always make the right turns, but by process of elimination, if you make a few wrong turns, then at least you know that you're not going to go down that path, and you can go back just a little bit, not all the way back to the beginning, just a little bit, and then find your way. So what Tansel's saying here is that the brain, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Tansel, the brain loves structure and organization. It loves to know where is it that you want to go, and then it will give you the steps that you need to take to get there. And I think this is true in business across a lot of businesses, is that people are just making it up every day. Hey, I'd like to have $1 million business. Okay, what's the $1 million business that you're going to do? I'm going to work in this area. Yes, it's possible that you could make $1 million out of that fruit shop. All right, other people have done it. But you need to break down the steps you have to take, the tasks that you have to achieve in order for you to get there. If you just turn up every day and are hoping for people to turn up, or hoping that you're going to have the best fruit shop, and you might have the best fruit shop in the world, but if you don't have a plan and a structure, your brain within a week or so, I don't know, maybe even sooner, going to get really fatigued with having to respond instinctively all the time. Is that right? Because it takes too
Yeah.
much battery power out.
That's right. It wastes a lot of energy, and this is the classic example of a leader, right? People in business are leaders. You have to be, because you have to be able to see, okay, this is what I want to achieve, but you can't have the roads all mixing up. It's like, yeah, you know where you want to go, but how are you going to get there if the roads are all mixed up? You're going to end up totally opposite direction if you don't know where the roads are leading. So that's what I mean by understanding the pathway and creating that structure, because the structure gives you either the direct route or through alternate routes, but you still get to where you need to get to, right? If you execute, right? If you don't execute and just create the pathways, well, then that's on you. So that having that clarity makes it so much easier. And I remember doing an example at uni when I was studying my MBA, and the lecturer would hand out PowerPoint slides before class, and they'd be 50, 60 slides, and there was no structure to it. So the headings, some headings were headings, some headings were subheadings, but they weren't even related. So what I'd do is I'd mind map those notes and print it out and give one to each student and the lecturer, and there'd only be 3 branches, and that's it. And then underneath those 3 branches will be like the basic subheadings, and that was the content. Didn't need 50 PowerPoint slides, only 3 topics. And when people saw the mind map, they were like, bloody hell, what's this? Now I get it. I understand, because this is the only 3 things that matter, not the 50 things that my brain gets overwhelmed with. Do you see what I mean? So there has to be some sort of a system to structure information that makes it easier for the brain to then go, okay, I get it now.
Now, if Darren was here, I reckon he would say that you missed an opportunity back then at university because you should have sold those mind maps, not just hand them out. But I know the gentleness in your heart, so you would have wanted everyone to achieve. Tansel, let's get on to probably one of the biggest things at the moment, and definitely whenever we touch on this topic on the Blink podcast, we always get we get a big response. And we've been talking since exiting COVID about people being in a funk. They're locked down in their brains, not locked down physically anymore, but it seems as though there's sort of this lockdown fatigue. We've called it the funk. People are, they're a lot less ready to get up and do the extra. They seem tired. They're not as motivated. Their brains are telling them, no, don't go out and do the extra work because, tomorrow you could go into lockdown. So what's the point? There just seems to be this funk, and it's across all industries. I know that you and I spoke about it the other day when we were talking about getting you on to the podcast. What is it that people can do to get their brains up and about? Because it seems to be controlled by the brain, this funk. It's our operating system in the human body. How do we prime it? How do we trick it out of the funk and get it motivated and get people back and active? Because that's what our listeners are going to want to know. want to know how to get themselves out of the funk and get themselves up and going.
Yeah, that's a good question, and people looking for answers. When you go on Google, you're looking for an answer, right? So, how to is like one of the most searched things, like how
Yeah.
to blah blah blah, how to poach an egg, how to tie shoelaces, how to tie a tie, like that. That's got millions and millions of views. So, how to get out of a funk. Very, very important question that is in there. Now, what I always say to people, looks try and identify, like, what state are you in, like, emotionally, because you might need the downtime, right? If you're overworked, or if you're not really in the right frame of mind, then you can use that time for a break, right? But you don't want to break when you need to go, 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 if you know what I mean. So that's where there's a lot of really cool hacks that I use with my clients as well. And generally they're mostly based on mental storytelling, right? Which you're obviously au fait with and understand, because what we tend to do, especially with things like procrastination, right? We tend to put off those things that we really need to be able to do, and we tell ourselves a story, right? One example of, I won't, maybe it's procrastination, who knows, like getting out of bed in the morning, right? A lot of people, just sit there, or they've got snooze alarms or whatever, and it's like, oh, I should be up, I should go to the gym, I should do this and that and that. But the more you start thinking about it, the more you're digging yourself a hole, because you're trying to come up with excuses, and then you find another job or a task that you think will justify not doing that particular thing, right? So, I need to make some phone calls, but you know what? If I get this email out the way, I'll feel much better about myself. So you put the focus on the email and pat yourself on the back, saying, "Oh, I did a really good job here." Whereas really, you should have made those phone calls, right? So there's a lot of that sort of false, thing going on as well.
That's
What I said,
that
yeah,
now what you're touching on now. This is hitting me hard, and I think it'll be hitting a lot of the listeners too. Is yeah, the ability for your brain to justify not doing something. It will protect. It's almost a protective mechanism, isn't it? It's like you need to make those cold calls. It's always cold calls with me, Tansel. I hate cold calls. They keep me awake at night. Today's a cold calling day. You can see I'm looking a little bit more tired than I normally do because I've been up awake thinking about these cold calls I need to make. What am I going to say? And then, of course, oh, well, I've got to do a podcast with my mate Tansel. I might make this last, I don't know, got 8 hours, Tansel, because then the day will be done and I won't have to make the cold calls.
yeah, we try and justify, certain actions and things. We try and make ourselves busy with other things, and then that busyness makes us feel productive. Whereas busyness doesn't equal productive, as you know. It's like just doing the things you need to do. If you make those cold calls, and still have 6 hours for the rest of the day, then you can at least pat yourself in the back, because you've overcome what you really needed to do. So there's quite a few techniques that I go through with people that includes that storytelling component, but there's one that doesn't include storytelling, right? And it's a Mel Robbins technique called the 5 second rule. Have you heard of that
Yeah.
before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
So
can
what
explain it to
she
the listeners. Yeah, you explain it.
Yeah, so what she says is that if you start, let's say you're lying in bed and you're thinking about getting up, well, she says just count down from 5 seconds, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then get up and do that thing, right? What that does, and it's really smart, is that it cuts that storytelling ability, right? Because as soon as you start getting into storytelling mode, you'll get into trying to justify that, oh, maybe I can sleep, I'm going to get up in half an hour anyway. Or I'm going to make those cold calls maybe during lunchtime anyway. So why bother doing it now? It's like you might be confident in yourself, but maybe lunchtime, maybe after eating lunch, you feel tired, fatigued, and you know what? I'll do it later on. So there's this delay. So if you cut that story, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go, pick up the phone, do whatever. Now you're just eliminating that storytelling part and you're just doing the action. So that's a really cool thing that I found myself. I don't necessarily do that because I just get up in the morning anyway. But for other things, yeah, it's been helpful for other people. One thing that I really love, and this is a technique that essentially, I mean, it works for a lot of people that I work with, is cutting down the time. Because what we do is we block, say half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours. Our brain loves, filling that full circle. It's like the Apple Watch, how if the fitness thing, you fill it up and you go,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I've reached that level. I call it the Netflix effect, right? So when you're watching a TV show on Netflix, what happens is that you watch it to the end, but you never get closure. It never closes the loop. So what you end up doing is you watch the next episode
Mm,
thinking, okay, I need to close that loop. Then you watch the next one and you end up binging,
mm,
right? Which is a huge thing these days.
mm,
Why? Because people don't get closure. That's why they binge,
mm.
right? So here's what you do. If you've got a particular tasks you want to um, do it for, say, 17 minutes, right? Some odd number. 23 minutes. Yeah, I wouldn't say going under 25 minutes because that's like the Pomodoro technique, right? Doing things for 25 minutes. What you'll find is that if you do something for 17 minutes, let's say read a book, um, then what happens is that you'll actually do that 17 minutes or 17 minutes your phone calls rather than saying, look, I've got an hour. It's easier to procrastinate on something that goes for an hour, or you can easily delay it. Whereas 17 minutes, you'll just get to it because it's only 17 minutes, right? An extreme version of that technique, what I call is the 1 minute rule, where if you're really struggling with something, just do it for a minute, right? Because what will happen is that the brain will have just ticked off, right? So you go for a minute and then you realize, you know what, I'm already in this. So the trick is not to do the task. The issue essentially is getting to the task. And if you're already at the task, guess what? You can go for hours. Right? So the
Yeah,
one
right.
minute rule is probably one of the best rules to implement if you're really struggling with procrastinating or putting off a task.
So when someone's sitting there, and it sort of goes back to what we mentioned earlier, if you've got too much information or if the task is too big or too far away for you to see the finish, then you'll probably procrastinate and not start at all. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes if you set something for 20 minutes a task that it might be 1 hour or 2 hours, you might end up doing more in those 20 minutes than you would in an hour, right? Sometimes that happens as well because you just get so productive in those minutes. So, for example, meeting hours at work, we used to do 1 hour meetings. Then it changed to like half an hour and then 25. And I know Gary Vaynerchuk does like 4 minute meetings,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's him. But you see what I mean? Sometimes you don't need to go for that full hour. You just set aside certain tasks. I know when I use Google Calendar a lot, and I've had to amend it because you put a 15-minute task in, it's just very tiny. So I've had to stretch it out. And I've
Yeah,
got
right.
tasks that are, 15 minutes, 13 minutes, and I get them all done. Why? Because they're only short.
So this is almost like you're putting more, you're doing what we would perceive in traditional thinking as putting more pressure on yourself to get something done sooner. But the actual adverse effect is that it actually takes the pressure off your brain because it's a shorter task. And of course, we can all focus and be high performance for a shorter amount of time. Well, it's easier to be high performance in a shorter amount of time than it is to be high performance for a long period of time. So if you
Now,
break it down into
yeah.
small organized tasks, then you're actually operating at a higher level on all these shorter tasks, and that at the end of the day accumulatively is going to put you miles in front.
And
It's
here's the
fascinating.
thing, right? This is what I find fascinating and what I love about it. It's perceived time. It's not exact time. You might set things for 1 minute, but it's you might have half an hour to do it. You might go for 45 minutes. Do you see what I mean? So that 1 minute just gets you to the task. You might set 1 minute, but then after that, you've just started. So you go ahead and do the thing for half an hour, maybe an hour because you're there now. Whereas before, you wouldn't have, even gone there. So you
Mm.
procrastinate on that 1 hour or just don't do the task at all. So this is something that, yeah, I've come across, especially if, I get a lot of people saying they have difficulty reading, not reading as in the words, but difficulty reading a whole book or, finishing things. And I said, just do it for 1 minute. So they go and do the 1 minute, then they realize that they've just started. So the brain needs to finish that loop. So they end up reading for half an hour. It's like magic.
Mm. It's almost while you were talking about that, just in my brain, and I'll share this with you, is this, it just sounds like what TikTok's done to the world. So TikTok started off as just 1 minute silly videos, and you're like, you know what? I'm I've got a minute. I'm waiting outside a meeting before I go in. I've got a couple of minutes. I'll just get on TikTok and watch some videos and get engaged with, a whole lot of 1 minute videos or less.
Yeah.
Now TikTok's gone longer, and I speak to people all the time, and I suffer it all the time. TikTok's a real vault. You can go in there and lose 45 minutes to an hour really quick. I mean, the people that I there's people that I see and know, and all of a sudden we don't want to take this down this path, but they'll disappear into the toilet for half an hour for a task that used to take them 5 minutes. And it's
Yeah.
just our phones and TikTok and getting in there. But I think if they were to go, they don't go watch YouTube anymore, because YouTube is
Mm.
that longer viewing, right? That bigger commitment. But they're like, oh, it's just short little TikTok. And then the curiosity loop that you were talking about, because TikTok's so good at leaving it open and the algorithm's so good at sending us what we want, is it, the next video blends into the next video, blends into the next video, and soon enough, that time has vanished.
Yeah, I used to work in e-learning and creating courses, and did that for about 15 years in organizations. And what I found was a lot of people were just putting a lot of information on one page, and then the next page and the next page, right, of these courses. And I think no one's ever going to do these courses, right? Because there's just so much to take in. So what I did was I would strip away those courses and just put either one sentence or a couple of things onto one page. So instead of having, 10 pages of full notes, have 100 pages of short sentences. And it's so much easier to go through 100 pages of short sentences than 10 pages of full notes, exactly like the TikTok, right? Because yeah, they could be 1 minute videos, 30-second videos, but people spend hours on them. Whereas YouTube, they might get tired after watching a couple of 5, 6 minute videos.
So that's a real lesson for anyone out there that's making presentations, presenting their business, presenting their products and their service. In your opinion, are they putting too much information into these slides? Like, what is the ideal sort of amount that the brain wants to see in order to? Because there's got to be that balance, right? You can't just put single words on a page and hope that it brings context and sense. So there has to be some sort of information. But from what you're talking about, and we've seen it with Mel Robbins, if you can just get that 5 minute, if you can just get that countdown to five, if you can make it snackable, I suppose is the trendy word. So, what is that balance between enough information and too much information?
Yeah, I think it depends on a lot of variables, right? Because you can have a lot of information, but it could be super engaging, like a really long YouTube video, or even podcasts. That could be, why do people sit through 2 hours of a podcast or more? Because, they get engaged, or sometimes just passive listening as well. So it really depends. But also, you can make short presentations that are just really bad as well and not engaging. So there's many elements, like you mentioned the models in your book, and I've mentioned sort of engaging memory techniques in my stuff as well. If you work on those certain elements of who am I talking to, who's my audience, what's their language, how long have I got, type of thing. If you start asking more questions, you'll get answers, but if you ask better questions, you'll get better answers as well. So I don't think it's something that's clear cut. It's more about you doing research and finding out, okay, what are the best strategies for telling a story? I want to do a TED talk, right? Am I just going to say generic stuff, or am I going to tell stories? Am I going to share ideas? Am I going to share something that's inspirational? Yeah. You don't want to touch people just from their brain. You don't want to just give information. You want to give information, but also touch people from the heart as well, where that's where the connection is. And you could do that even in the most boring, say, let's say budget presentations, right? You can even do that. And the heart thing is, well, where's it hitting? Where's the impact
Yeah.
in our organization, or where's the impact in society, right? That's going to hit people in the heart, not just the brain with figures. So there's a lot of things. I mean, I can't give you a direct answer, but there's a lot of variables involved, and I think it's definitely up to the individual to learn these skills. Read up on these books, or connect the dots somehow with the strategies they've learned.
I suppose that's the art of it, right? Is that, we've spoken about, cutting off the storytelling in your brain in order to trigger into action, adopt the 1 minute task to get yourself started. And then you're talking about, it's not just about information in your presentations, guys, in your pitches, in your one pages. You've got to have the human impact. You've got to have the human storytelling piece. And we used to see it all the time. Tansel and I, we spent a lot of time in about the mid 2000s playing around with online courses, that typical Facebook. You run an ad to a half-day workshop, and then from the half-day workshop, you sell people up to the 3 day, and they were the goal. That was the golden era, Tansel. We were frustrated a little bit with it at the time, but there were so many lessons and learnings in that whole Facebook model, and moving people to get them into a room. We were getting people into physical rooms, and what was really interesting was that the ads or the content that drove the biggest response were the ones where we started to open up about ourselves and our stories, and even, to be honest, the struggles that we were sharing with the people themselves. And I think that's a massive part of sales. And on the next episode, I'll get Darren's opinion on this too, because he's a high performance sales guy. There is definitely something in the brain that if you can connect or align with your audience so that they feel as though you're one of them, you become 10 times more influential.
Yeah, that's the rapport building element. Yeah, you don't want to just give information. I mean, in real estate, for example, a house is like, that's the information, but a home, that's the emotional connection. You're not just selling a house, you're selling a home. So what does a home mean to you, and what does a house mean? So a house is just a static image. Oh yeah, that's a house. But if you said, build a home, what does that involve? Does it involve, seeing your family in there, your pets in there, and you're going to celebrate the celebrations and all that sort of stuff. So it's about understanding what can we do with information. And this is part of the memory training as well. Information data is just data. It doesn't make any sense until we put meaning to it. And meaning helps us remember, helps us connect. So for example, right, in the memory competitions, they'll give us numbers in rows of 40 digits, right? And we have to memorize in rows of 40. And if we make one mistake, we don't get 39 out of 40, we get 20 out of 40. If we make two mistakes, we get 0, right? So it's brutal. And a lot of people they might memorize 200 digits, but if they make a couple of mistakes in each row, they end up getting 0, right? So what I'm trying to get at this is that when we memorize numbers, we memorize them in pairs of digits, and then we make a story, right? The very basic strategy that we use. And if the story is not emotional, if it doesn't connect, then we're not going to get those 40 digits. So essentially, we become effectively storytellers because we're creating this huge story involving 40 digits. Well, it's really, if we're pairing off, there's like 20 things to remember, not 40. So it's the story we're telling, and those stories are connected to numbers, which are just data, right?
Yep.
It's just data. And if you just look at data and you're not using stories, you're not going to remember 2 digits or more, right? Even myself. But because I've connected emotion and story to all these numbers, I can remember hundreds, and over 20,000 from the Yellow Pages phone book, right? Which is the same thing. So you need to be able to see the data, whatever it is, like I said, house, connected to the emotional side, home, right? Or numbers connected to some images or associations. And that's how you get that connection to the brain. And you can use that in many, many forms as well, in many professions.
Why is it that we think that the brain holds on to story more than just information? Because the way that I was taught at school was that the brain's just like a big filing cabinet, and you just get the information, and we'll teach you how to do parabolas, and you just file them away in the back here in your maths folder, And then, in 5 or 6 years when you're at work and your boss says, hey, can you help me out with these parabolas? You're going to be able to do it. And of course, in the fields that we went into, parabolas never came back into existence. Algebra is a distant memory, distant nightmare maybe is probably the better description. But it just didn't seem to work. And even now, you and I have got similar age kids, teenagers who are going through high school, and who wouldn't want Tansel as their dad helping you do your homework, Mr. Memory? But I'm sitting there, my kids are like, Dad, can you help me with my year 10 maths? And I did year 12 maths. And I'm sitting there and I've got zero memory of any of this stuff. Like, I've dumped it. So is that because I didn't attach a story? I didn't love my maths enough?
No, it's because it's like learning a foreign language, right? If you're just repeating that information over and over again, it's actually not stored in the brain. It's the information just goes in, right, and it's floating around in the cloud in the brain, right? So there is actually no location, right? It goes in processed in a particular spot, like the hippocampus, all that stuff, right? But there is no location. So memory techniques, they create the folders in your brain. So techniques like a memory palace, they create like folders on your computer, right? So at the moment, with all that information you learn from school, it's like chucking everything on a desktop with hundreds of thousands of
Yeah.
files. Think of it that way. Whereas
You'll never find it.
I bet you probably know all the files on your computer that is meaningful to you because it's under the correct categories of folders, right? Same thing as our brain. We can create those category of folders and then put whatever it is that needs to be in there and then walk away. And then when someone says, hey, Jonathan, what was this particular thing about, or what was the parabolas, blah, blah, blah. You go, you know what? I've got a folder for that. So you go into your folder in your brain and then you go, you know what? It's this, and recall everything perfectly
Yeah.
because you've set up the folder structure, right? You can do this. Anyone can do this.
I don't believe that you can replant the parabola folder into my brain, Tansel. I'm sorry. I know that you've got great faith in many humans, but me and parabolas, we don't mix. There's no mix for me and parabolas. Um,
You do realize my wife's a psychologist, so there might be something else you need to you need
wow,
to address with the parabola trauma.
the parabola trauma. So this is really interesting. So your wife's a psychologist, very highly regarded. Um, I've had the pleasure of meeting a number of times. Very smart individual. You were very smart marrying her. Well, let's put that on the table. But do you got like what's the dinner conversation between you two mega minds sitting here? Do you talk about high end stuff, or is it just a complete shutdown because your brain needs a rest and you just turn on Married at First Sight and that's it?
Oh, look, we enjoy having a laugh, so we talk about all sorts of stuff, and she talks about her challenges at work, and we do talk about the brain a lot as well, which is good. What it's doing. She's talking about always new research that's coming out, and she's doing like play therapy. And how that's having a massive impact on people. So we're always talking about new stuff. I'm showing her Chat GPT, AI, and amazing things that could do as well. Yeah, so our conversations are very open and creative, and I think that's the best way to approach it because from creativity comes more ideas and more discussion points. I used to be super introverted, so it was very difficult for me to get into conversations, but now it's the more you sort of open up into other areas, the more you can talk about it. If that makes, I mean, that's it's almost common sense. But yeah, I find that I'm starting to become more interested and ask more interested questions rather than interesting questions, if you know what I mean. So I think that's where the coaching has helped me as well. So it's not just about being smart in front of people. It's like, okay, I'm genuinely interested. Tell me more, and that's what gets me excited. Not just conversations with my wife at home, but with other people as well, because now I'm interested in what they're doing, or what challenges they might have, or how they're saving the world, and so on.
Yeah. Okay, Tans, I'm really aware of the time and I know that we've got to let you go, but there's just two final questions I want to ask you. The first one is how much about the brain do we actually understand?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist or anything like that. I only deal with the practical application of the brain. So that's where my expertise is. But from, all the research and stuff that I've done in my, very short amount of time working on this is, yeah, people don't know that much. There's constantly a lot of work on it, but it's very, very small. So, we'll learn more and more as we go along. And I'm learning a lot just through everyday life, like things like using chat gpt or having these discussions and learning, well, procrastination or how to manage stress using memory techniques. I never knew memory could use to reduce stress and anxiety, because I suffered from anxiety quite a bit. And once I kicked in that it was anxiety, I pretty much fixed it within 2 weeks because I knew what to do with the memory techniques. Right. So we're always learning
Let's
stuff,
just
whether that's
let's
sort of.
jump into that for a second because I think that's really important because there is a lot
Yeah.
of anxiety around. People are really nervous. I mean,
Mm.
given the news every night at the moment and talkback radio and the shock and the awe campaigns that they're putting out there, anxiety is really commonplace because that's what they're putting onto us. Specifically, if you live in Victoria,
Mm.
we've sort of been under this reign of shock and awe. You said you could fix your anxiety in 2 weeks without probably delving into it too much, but like, what did you do?
Well, first I acknowledged it. I thought, wow, okay, this is what I have, but I didn't realize it. So I kept doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, right? But once I understood I had anxiety, it's like, oh, okay, this is what I can do. So what I did was anxiety was essentially, I was creating a story. Right? I was creating a story, and I had travel anxiety, right? Because I've got a chronic illness, and that played a huge part. And it got so bad that I couldn't even pick up the kids from school. 4-minute walk away. That's how bad it was.
Mm.
Um, so what I did was I thought, okay, once I understood, I was making stories up, right, with my brain, and those stories were so powerful that it wasn't, it was stressing me out every time I wanted to do something, right? The anxiety of
You
what
were
might happen.
catastrophizing the scenario of what could
Exactly.
go
So the
wrong.
story was so strong. So, and because I knew memory techniques, right? Memory techniques essentially helped me to make better stories, right? Like I gave with the number example, we had such good storytelling skills that we could memorize hundreds of numbers within minutes, right? That's how good our storytelling ability was. So what I did was thought, you know what? I've got a strength in storytelling. Obviously, the downside of memory is if you don't know, right, and you've trained your memory, you can catastrophize really well. That's what I was doing,
Uh,
right? So I had a really strong storytelling ability, but I was catastrophizing well. But once I understood it, I'm like, you know what? I can make better stories now, right? So that's what I focused on is making better stories, like better outcomes and visualizing and living them while making the other story that I had in my mind less and less memorable. Right. And how do you do that? Well, you try and take the emotion out of it by taking yourself out of the picture. And because it's all colorful and imaginative, visualizing the event in gray, right? And then making it smaller and smaller. So what you're doing is you're focusing on that negative moment, really, really small, in gray, detaching yourself. And what happens over a period of time, it's not going to happen for everything like deep down trauma, right? There's other techniques for that. But for my own thing, because I focused on that a lot and then, but gave the other one greater focus, the positive story, it shifted my mind and made me do the thing that I really needed to do and not worry about what might happen because there's only a little gray dot. So, and that was a massive change for me. And now I don't have to do that because I overcame it. Now I can just do what it is that I need to do.
so you got this awareness of what you're doing, and you can stop it. You can then chuck in the Mel Robbins 5 second rule, stop it, and say, "Well, it's just a 4 minute walk. I can do it. I can do that and get back because if I just stay
Mm.
here and next 4 minutes, the chances of something going wrong are very little." Hey,
Yeah, yeah. Or even longer travels, like half an hour, 1 hour, that would really stress me out.
mm.
Even 20 minutes. It really, played a huge part of me not visiting a lot of friends and family, and family is like, why isn't Tansel coming over? What's wrong with him? Type of thing, and you can't explain it to anyone. It's really, really challenging, right? But I didn't know, right? But once I found out, I'm like, oh, that's what's happening. I can change the story now. So things like cold calls, I was terrible at it, right? Even though years ago I used to work for a company making cold calls, right? And I was the number one salesperson there for months running on end. But I would every single call that would come in, I would stress. But as soon as it kicked in and I'd speak, everything was normal, right? So again, it was the stories I was telling myself over and over and over again, right? This was when I was a lot younger, before the memory techniques. But now it's like cold calling. Man, it's the best thing ever, because I'm having conversations with people. I'm talking about what I'm passionate about, and more importantly, how I can help them as well. So I'm not thinking about money, because yeah, it comes down to, money and all this sort of stuff for business. But if you can look at that higher level of what are you really trying to do, how are you going to help this person or the company or whatever, look at the bigger things you want to achieve. That's going to overweigh everything else that you're worrying about as well. But it takes time to develop this. You're not just going to do it overnight. It's constant practice, and the more you do it, the better you get at it.
It's almost like removing the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that easy? That's amazing, because I actually remember. I know you've got to fly because you've got another podcast, because you're a man in demand. But you used that technique to get over your fear of swimming, didn't you?
No, not quite.
Oh,
I
come
love
on.
swimming. Yeah, it wasn't
Huh?
swimming. Yeah, it was the traveling for me. Yeah.
Oh, gee, I've got this real memory of you when you first were going to start to swim, and I thought
Yeah,
you were worried.
it was probably yeah, maybe fear of the 50-meter pool, but
That's
I
what it
got
was.
over
That's what it
that.
was. The 50-meter pool, and I was trying to convince you that by doing the 25-meter pool, because I used to swim a lot, is that it would reduce the efficiency of the actual exercise by almost 30%. Because every time you got to an end, you'd stop, breathe, have a little bit of a rest, and then go again. And I was saying to you, no, Tansel, you got to get you to a 50-meter pool, and it'll improve your return by 30%, because they're the sort of gains that we were looking at then. These are like human
Yeah.
improvements. And that's what it was. It was the fear of the 50-meter pool. But you actually ended up going, right? You do a
Uh,
50 every now and then.
I learned so much just by going onto the 50, because it wasn't just doing the 50, it was perfecting the form, it was breathing better. There were
Mm.
so many elements to doing the 50. And once I did the 50, I thought, you know what? I'm actually a better swimmer now. It's not just doubling the length of 25, it's making myself a better swimmer. So I learned so much from that bit of advice. It was unbelievable. Yeah.
But exactly
Thank
what
you.
we're talking about today, right? Start with your 1 minute, your 25 meters, your 1 minute, and then you'll graduate up. So just get that, get going. Tansel, this has been a great conversation. I really thank you. There's so many nuggets of gold in this. Apologies that Darren couldn't make it today, but I'm sure we're going to get you back on pretty soon, and that'll be the three of us going through this. So much great information. I really appreciate your time, and happy birthday to your youngest today. So thanks for joining us on your daughter's birthday. Special shout out, and congratulations on the new member of your family, Dr. Bennett. Tansel's just got a second puppy, so he's going to be very busy in the next couple of weeks raising the puppy. But you're just a wealth of information. I love talking to you. I love hanging out with you, because I think you make me better. You get me thinking, and man, I'm going to have a very productive day after recording this episode. So thank you so much, and I look forward to getting you back on.
Yeah, thanks, man. I really appreciate it as well, and all the work that you're doing as well. It's really inspiring, and mate, hopefully, people listening could, make something of it, because it's not just about listening to all this stuff. Knowledge is great, but until you actually use it and put into action, that's where you're going to see the benefits. So, yeah, really appreciate you getting it out there as well to people.
No worries. TanselAli.com is where they can find you. There's books, there's resources, there's so many different ways to connect with Tansel. At least go and hit him up on social media, because it's fascinating. He's making a real push on TikTok at the moment at getting into our brain worms and hooking us. But thank you, mate, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. Cheers.
Peace.